Windows is no longer your friend.
Microsoft just lost $180 billion. Not because of a hack, not because of Apple, because countries are rejecting Windows 11, governments are banning it, hospitals are abandoning it, companies are quietly planning their exit, and inside Microsoft, even Bill Gates is reportedly worried. So what happened? Why would the world suddenly turn on Windows, and is this the beginning of the end? Today, I'm going to show you the pattern nobody is talking about. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. It started with one number, 18%. That's how much Windows revenue dropped in one quarter, 18%. Now that doesn't sound dramatic until you realize Microsoft almost never drops like that. So what caused it? Was it just a slow year? Or was something bigger happening? Let's look at the moment everything shifted. During Microsoft's earnings call, an analyst asked a simple question: how much of this drop is because companies don't want Windows 11? Simple question, but not a small one, because if companies don't want your product, that's very different from they haven't upgraded yet. One is timing, the other is rejection. There was a pause, and pauses matter. Earnings calls are scripted, numbers are rehearsed, answers are polished, silence is rare. Then the CFO said, "We're seeing deployment delays." That sounds harmless, almost boring, but in corporate language, that's a yellow light. Let me explain it in a simple way. If you're selling something and customers say, "Not right now," that can mean two things. Either they're busy or they're not convinced. And when you're talking about giant corporations with thousands of computers, they don't delay upgrades for fun. Upgrades cost money, time, training, hardware. So if they delay, it means something changed in their calculation. But what? Was Windows 11 too expensive? Was it too slow? Were the new AI features causing problems? Or was it something more serious? Notice what the CFO did not say. She didn't say, "Adoption is strong." She didn't say, "Enterprises are excited." She said, "Deployment delays." Now here's where it gets interesting. In enterprise software, hesitation spreads. If one company pauses, other companies watch. If 3 pause, now it's a trend. If dozens pause, that's a signal. And investors know this. That's why the stock dropped 7% after the call. Not because of one bad quarter, but because of what that question revealed. The market heard something different. They heard, companies are unsure. And when companies are unsure, they start testing alternatives. Not loudly, quietly, pilot programs, small internal trials, just in case migrations. And that's the part that matters, because once a company seriously tests an alternative, it's no longer fully dependent. And remember that phrase, reducing dependency. You're going to hear it again, but here's the real twist. The earnings call didn't create the problem. It exposed it. The hesitation was already happening. It just hadn't been connected yet. And when we look outside the US, we start to see something bigger. Because while American companies were quietly delaying, one country made a very public decision, a permanent one. And that's where this story really begins. South Korea. One country didn't delay, it didn't hesitate, it banned Windows 11. In May 2025, South Korea ordered all government agencies to migrate away from Windows 11 within 18 months. That's 1.2 million computers. Gone. Governments don't move fast. They don't make emotional decisions. So if they walk away from the most dominant operating system in the world, something serious happened. Official reason? National security and data collection concerns. But here's what really made this different. Windows 11's cloud-connected design conflicted with Korea's data sovereignty laws. Data sovereignty means one simple thing. Your country controls its own data. No automatic flow to foreign servers. Now think back to the earnings call. Deployment delays. This wasn't a delay. This was rejection. And here's why that matters. South Korea didn't just remove Windows, they replaced it with a custom Linux system. They invested $340 million. trained 18,000 IT staff, migrated 140,000 systems already. That's not pressure, that's permanent. And once a country proves it can operate without Windows, others start asking the same question: do we actually need it? Or are we just used to it? And that question is what makes this dangerous. Because South Korea wasn't the last. It was the first domino, and the next one fell in a very different sector. Healthcare. Let's go to Australia. South Korea was about sovereignty. Australia was about something even more dangerous: liability. In Australia, major hospitals began testing Windows 11 on small batches of computers. Not thousands, just a few hundred. Standard procedure. But during those tests, something raised alarms. Even with certain AI features turned off, system processes were still capturing visual snapshots and background data tied to patient records. For a normal company, that's uncomfortable. For a hospital, that's a legal nightmare. Australia has strict privacy laws for medical data. If patient information is mishandled, the penalties are massive: fines, lawsuits, public trust destroyed. So hospital legal teams reviewed Windows 11, and their conclusion was simple: too risky. Not broken, not unusable, risky. And in healthcare, risk is everything. Royal Melbourne Hospital began migrating thousands of systems to a locked-down Linux environment. No AI integrations, no automatic cloud transmission, full internal control. Then other hospitals followed: St. Vincent's, Royal Adelaide, Alfred Hospital. This wasn't political, it wasn't ideological, it was compliance math. If using Windows creates even a small legal risk, and an alternative removes that risk, the decision becomes logical. Now remember what we saw earlier. Companies were delaying deployments. In healthcare, they weren't delaying. They were exiting. And when highly regulated industries start leaving, regulators start looking closer. Which is exactly what happened next. Because if hospitals in Australia saw risk, what would Europe see under GDPR? That's where this story gets even bigger. Let's go to Europe. South Korea was about sovereignty. Australia was about legal risk. Europe is about power. Because Europe doesn't just migrate, Europe investigates. In early 2025, the European Commission began reviewing whether Windows 11 complies with GDPR. And GDPR is not a suggestion. It's one of the strictest privacy laws in the world. If you break it, fines can reach 4% of global revenue. For Microsoft, that's around $10 billion. Now here's the key question. What was Europe looking at? Data collection, default settings, cloud transmission outside EU borders, and something very important: whether users can truly opt out without breaking functionality. Because under GDPR, consent must be clear. Not hidden, not confusing. Clear. If an operating system collects data by default and makes it difficult to fully disable, that becomes a regulatory issue. Now here's where this gets interesting. The investigation wasn't even finished. But companies didn't wait. German firms began deploying hundreds of thousands of Linux systems. France followed. Italy followed. Not because Windows was banned, but because uncertainty is expensive. If there's even a small chance regulators force changes or impose fines, large companies hedge. There's that pattern again. Reducing dependency, not panic, strategy. And when Europe moves strategically, it sends a signal globally. Because Europe represents 450 million people. It's Microsoft's second largest market. So now think about what we've seen. South Korea, sovereignty. Australia, liability. Europe, regulation. Different reasons, same direction. And if governments are investigating, and hospitals are migrating, and corporations are hedging, what happens inside the companies that depend on Windows the most? That's where this stops being international and starts becoming internal. Let's talk about Fortune 500 companies. Governments investigate, hospitals migrate, but corporations calculate. And what they're calculating right now, is risk. In mid-2025, internal documents from dozens of Fortune 500 companies began circulating. They weren't dramatic. They weren't public announcements. They were quiet strategy memos, and many of them included the same phrase, reduce Windows dependency. Not eliminate, reduce. That word matters, because elimination is emotional. Reduction is strategic. One major tech company reportedly paused all Windows 11 deployments, not because it crashed, not because it failed, because the business case wasn't clear. Let's simplify this. If upgrading costs money, requires new hardware, triggers retraining, and introduces potential compliance risk, then what's the benefit? That's the question executives are asking, and when the answer isn't obvious, they wait, or they diversify. Some companies are evaluating moving 30% to 40% of their workforce to Mac or Linux. Not overnight, gradually, quietly, department by department. Why? Because dependency equals vulnerability. If your entire workforce depends on one ecosystem, and that ecosystem changes direction, you have no leverage. So companies create leverage. That's what this is, leverage. And here's the bigger issue. If even half of those Fortune 500 companies reduce Windows usage by 30%, we're talking about millions of enterprise seats. Enterprise seats are high margin, high value, long-term contracts. This isn't consumer churn. This is structural revenue pressure. Now connect the dots. South Korea proved migration is possible. Australia proved risk can trigger it. Europe proved regulation can accelerate it. Fortune 500 companies are proving something else. Diversification is now rational, and once diversification becomes rational, dominance weakens. But there's still one group that matters more than governments, more than hospitals, more than corporations, because they decide where software gets built, developers. And what they're doing might be the real tipping point. Let's look at the numbers. Developers decide the future, and Windows is losing them. A year ago, over half of developers primarily used Windows. Now it's barely 38%. Mac is catching up. Linux is rising. And here's why that matters. If developers build for Mac first, applications launch there first, Windows becomes secondary, and when software stops being Windows first, dominance fades. This is how monopolies end. But if all of this is happening, why hasn't Microsoft stopped it? Because inside Microsoft, there's reportedly disagreement. One side wants small fixes, more privacy options, more performance patches. The other side wants something bigger. Admit Windows 11 failed. Start over. Rebuild the architecture. That's not a minor update. That's a reset. And resets take years. So here's the uncomfortable question. Can Microsoft fix this fast enough, or has the shift already started? Let's go back to that first number, 18%. Revenue drop. That wasn't random. It was the first signal. Market share is now near 62%. Below the psychological 65% comfort zone, Linux is rising, Mac is rising. Governments are diversifying, corporations are hedging, developers are shifting. None of these alone kills Windows, but together, it's momentum, and momentum is hard to reverse. There are two possible futures. One, Microsoft makes radical changes, wins back trust, rebuilds Windows around privacy and control. Or two, Windows becomes just another operating system, not dominant, just an option. And if that happens, it changes the entire tech ecosystem. Office, Azure, enterprise software, everything. And that's something we'll break down in another video because the ripple effects are bigger than most people realize. If this helped you see the bigger picture, hit like. It tells YouTube this kind of deep analysis matters. And if you want to understand where tech power is really shifting, subscribe, because the next breakdown might surprise you even more.